The hum of the city outside the windows of my penthouse was relentless, a constant reminder that life had been going on without me. That wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was knowing that it had gone on without my permission, without me. I had been in the hospital for weeks, 3 long, feverish weeks spent fighting complications from hip surgery. The pain in my joints had nothing on the ache in my chest, though. I'd been so wrapped up in my career that I had missed the subtle fractures forming in the relationships closest to me. I never thought they would break, not really, but here I was, standing at the threshold of my own home, wondering what it meant for something to belong to you if no one else saw it the same way. I didn't expect much when I came back from the hospital. I never did. My business, my life, it all revolved around me. I had built it all from the ground up, poured years of sweat, tears, and sacrifice into making sure my design firm stood strong and unshakable. I used to think that was the way to do it. Work hard enough and everything else would fall into place. But I hadn't been home in almost a month, and no one had called to ask how I was. The silence was deafening. It was late afternoon when the taxi dropped me off at the entrance of the high-rise, its polished marble floors gleaming in the warm light as I stepped out, my cane tapping the ground with each labored step. The driver glanced at me with a look that almost seemed sympathetic, but I couldn't muster the strength to care. "Need help with your bags, ma'am?" he asked. "No, just to the door," I replied, barely finding the energy to lift my voice. I had expected to be greeted by Eva, my only daughter. My heart should have been full at the thought, but something in the pit of my stomach churned. She had always been a distant part of my world, an echo of the life I once dreamed of having, motherhood-love balance. Instead, I'd pushed her away in pursuit of success. I told myself it was for her future, for the life I could give her. But as I stood there staring up at the door, I realized that nothing about that was true anymore. I had been so focused on building my empire that I neglected to build my family. I knew the code to my building by heart, but today, when I swiped it in, I found myself hesitating. The doors opened before I could even reach for the handle. Richard. My son, 33 years old, now stood at the threshold. His face didn't hold the warmth I was used to the one he used to have when he was a child. There was no smile, no welcoming embrace, just a cool, detached gaze. His presence filled the doorway as though he was standing between me and something I could no longer reach. I leaned on my cane a little harder. The tiredness in my bones started to seep into my mind. "Richard, what's going on?" I asked, stepping forward, but his eyes held me back before my foot could cross the threshold. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice colder than I expected. "We were expecting you tomorrow." I blinked the words like an unfamiliar sting. The anticipation of coming home to familiarity and comfort was dissolving like sugar in water, and I could taste the bitterness. "What do you mean?" I asked, voice trembling slightly, but not from the pain in my hip. This wasn't the welcome I had imagined. Richard didn't answer immediately. Behind him, I noticed a subtle movement, a flash of blonde hair. Veronica, his fiancée, standing beside him, her arms crossed and an unreadable expression on her face. I hadn't seen much of her in the last few years, but I always felt that sense of unease around her. She had an air about her too perfect, too calculated. But now, in the shadow of this moment, she didn't look like a woman in love. She looked like someone waiting for something to unfold. "Richard, what is going on?" I demanded again, leaning on my cane, but there was no answer. Veronica's lips curved into something like a smile, but it felt more like a smirk. Her eyes glinted like she already knew what was about to happen. "Grace," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We've already packed your things. They're in boxes in the garage." I couldn't comprehend what she was saying at first. Packed my things. Boxes. A dizzying wave of confusion hit me, mixing with the exhaustion I felt from being in the hospital for so long. Packed my things, I repeated, barely able to form a coherent sentence. "What do you mean, My voice shook, and the edge of panic crept up behind the words. Richard stepped aside just enough for me to see the people behind him, Veronica's parents, Raymond and Claudia Sterling. I barely recognized them anymore. They stood in the entryway of my home like they owned the place, their eyes scanning me with that familiar, judgmental look they always carried. I tried to focus, tried to make sense of what they were saying. Raymond, tall and too put together, spoke with his usual arrogance. "We're sorry it came to this," he said, but I could tell he wasn't. But Richard made it very clear. "This house is no longer yours." I stumbled back, the world around me shifting like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. "What?" My mind raced to catch up with my own disbelief. "This house is no longer mine." The words stuck in my throat like ash. "You signed it over Grace," Veronica chimed in, her voice clipped but carrying an undeniable edge of triumph. "It's legally transferred, all of it. The house, the assets, everything." The shock hit me like a wave, cold and sudden. My legs buckled slightly, but I caught myself. "I never signed anything," I managed to whisper, but it felt like the truth was slipping away. "Oh, but you did." Richard said, his voice cold and hollow. "You signed papers when you were in the hospital. The power of attorney. You signed everything. It was for your health. Remember." The realization hit hard. The documents I had signed in a haze of post-surgery confusion, thinking they were just about my medical care, had included much more. I trusted my son blindly. In that moment, everything felt like a lie, a carefully constructed lie. "You tricked me," I said, my voice hollow. "This is illegal?" Veronica's smile never wavered. "We're doing what's best for everyone, Grace. You're not well enough to handle this house anymore. It's too much for you." The words echoed in my mind, thick and suffocating. Too much for me. The weight of that phrase pressed down, and I could hardly breathe. The penthouse I had spent years designing with my own hands, with my heart, was being taken away from me. My son, my only son, was the one leading the charge. I knew then what had been taken from me. It wasn't just my home, it was my family, my trust, my identity. What was left when everything you built, everything you loved was so casually stripped away? What was left when even your own flesh and blood had betrayed you? I straightened up, breathing deeply despite the ache in my chest. I wasn't going to give in to the numbness just yet. This wasn't the end. No, it was just the beginning. The days that followed felt like a blur, each moment dragging heavier than the last. The pain in my body from the surgery seemed almost trivial compared to the ache in my heart. For the first time in my life, I was lost, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. It was as if the ground beneath me had shifted, and I was struggling to find my footing in a world that felt foreign. How had I let it all slip away without noticing? How had I let Eva, my only daughter, fall so far from the path of love and loyalty that I had tried to carve out for her? The house that had been my sanctuary, my retreat from the world, now felt like a prison. Every corner, every picture frame on the wall, every piece of furniture, each one seemed to mock me, reminding me of the life I thought I had. The space that once held the laughter of a family, the warmth of shared meals, the quiet comfort of knowing I had done my best, was now empty. It was a shell hollowed out, stripped of its soul by the very people I had trusted most. The sting of betrayal was all-consuming, and I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and trust. Richard's words haunted me. "You signed it over." Xiaodu. I couldn't escape them, couldn't shake the image of his cold expression when he told me the house was no longer mine. It had been months since I'd signed anything. The last thing I remembered was the stack of papers the lawyer had handed me before my surgery. In a fog of fear and exhaustion, I'd signed them, trusting that it was for my health, for my future. How could I have been so naive? I spent hours going through the paperwork the lawyer had given me, scouring every page, desperately searching for something that would make sense of this nightmare. My eyes scanned the fine print, each word blurring together until I found it power of attorney. I had given Richard the legal right to make decisions on my behalf, but I had never imagined this would be what he chose to do with that power. I needed answers. I needed to understand how we had gone from the closeness we once shared to this cold, calculated betrayal. But I couldn't get them from Richard, not now. Not when his face had hardened, his eyes distant, as if he had already decided who he was going to be in this twisted game. I couldn't trust him anymore. And Eva. My heart broke as I thought about her. My sweet girl, the one I had raised with love and care, who had grown up watching me sacrifice everything for her future, for our family. How had she become so blinded by greed, so easily swayed by Declan and his manipulative ways? It wasn't just about the house. No, it was far worse. This was about everything I had done for them, everything I had given up for them. And now they were taking it all away. I had trusted Richard with my life. I had trusted him to look after me when I was vulnerable, to make sure that my needs were met, that I would be safe. Instead, he had used that trust to rob me of everything I had built. I couldn't stay in this house. Not like this. Not while it was filled with the ghosts of broken promises and lost love. But I couldn't leave either. Not yet. I had no place to go, no refuge from the storm that was raging in my heart. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I fought back. I reached out to Lena. I had known Lena for over 20 years. She was the attorney who had helped me through the rough patches of my career, the one who had helped me navigate the business world when I was just starting out. Lena had always been more than just a lawyer to me. She was my friend, my confidant, and now she was my only hope. I needed her to help me figure out what had happened to my life, to my family, to my trust. When Lena arrived, her presence felt like a lifeline in the storm. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask questions. She simply set to work helping me sift through the mountain of legal documents, unraveling the layers of deceit that had been woven around me. The more we dug, the more I realized how deep the betrayal went. It wasn't just the house. It was everything, the money that had been siphoned from my accounts, the false signatures, the forged documents. I couldn't help but feel the weight of it, all the crushing realization that I had been blind to what was happening under my own roof. The sense of betrayal twisted in my chest like a knife, each new revelation cutting deeper, leaving me with more questions than answers. How could Richard, my son, the one I had raised, be a part of something so vile? How had he become a stranger to me and Eva? How could she have allowed this to happen? The truth, when it finally came to light, was even worse than I had imagined. Lena uncovered a series of financial transactions that tied Declan and his family to the fraudulent transfer of the house. And it didn't stop there. They had been draining my accounts, siphoning funds from my business, all while I lay in the hospital bed completely unaware. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power. Declan had been plotting this for months, manipulating Eva and Richard like pawns in his game. But what did he want? What was his end goal? That was the question that haunted me now. And it was a question I needed to answer, because without understanding why they had done this, I couldn't possibly understand how to fix it. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Richard had looked at me that day when I returned home. He had been so cold, so distant, as if he had already made up his mind. The son I had raised, the boy I had nursed through illness, taught to drive, supported through college. Where had he gone? Where had my son gone? And who was this stranger who stood in his place, signing away everything I had worked for, everything I had loved? I spent sleepless nights replaying the moment over and over again in my mind. I wanted to believe that Richard hadn't known what Declan was doing. I wanted to believe that he had been coerced, manipulated into it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that he had known. The guilt in his eyes, the way he avoided my gaze, he knew. He had chosen to ignore it. And that perhaps more than anything else hurt the most. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let them win. This wasn't just about reclaiming my home or my business. It was about reclaiming myself. I had spent my life building everything I had, and now I was going to tear down the walls of deception they had built around me. Lena helped me contact the FBI. We had enough evidence to press charges, but I had to act quickly. Declan's family wasn't going to sit idly by while their scheme unraveled. I needed to move fast. The days turned into weeks as we worked to gather everything we could. Every phone call, every document, every piece of evidence was meticulously recorded, cataloged, and prepared for the court. The weight of it all was exhausting, but I couldn't afford to slow down. I had no choice. I had been betrayed, but I would not be defeated. Not by my son, not by Eva, not by Declan. One night after another long day of meetings with Lena and the team, I found myself sitting alone in the living room of my penthouse. The place felt like a stranger's home now. The space I had once called mine now, hollowed out, abandoned by the warmth of family. I looked around at the things I had once cherished, the photographs of happier days, the furniture my husband and I had painstakingly chosen together. The memories seemed so distant now, so far out of reach. I let out a shaky breath and stood up, walking over to the window. The city stretched out before me, the bright lights of the skyline mocking my sadness, reminding me of the vastness of the world and how alone I felt in it. But in that moment, something shifted inside me. The pain, the betrayal, it didn't consume me anymore. I was tired, yes. But I was not broken. The world had tried to take everything from me, but it hadn't taken my will. Not yet. Not ever. And I was going to take it back. The moment I'd been dreading finally arrived. I stood in front of the penthouse door again, this time feeling an unfamiliar sense of control, though my heart was still pounding in my chest. My hands shook as I gripped the doorknob, but it wasn't the pain from my recovery that caused it. No, this was different. This was the weight of betrayal of the life I thought I knew being ripped apart. I wasn't sure how I would react when I saw Richard again. Would I shout? Would I break down, beg him to explain himself? Or would I stand there numb, looking at the son I had raised, trying to reconcile the boy I once knew with the man who had cast me aside so callously? I took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping into the empty hallway. The penthouse no longer felt like home. The smell of fresh paint and the sterile newness of the space made me feel like a stranger in my own life. I had spent years creating this place, meticulously curating every detail, every corner of it. Now it seemed like a hollow shell of what it once was, a cold place, a place that held nothing but memories of a life stolen from me. Richard was standing in the living room, his back to me. His posture was rigid, as though he were waiting for something, waiting for me to speak, or maybe waiting for the storm to break. When I stepped into the room, he turned his face clouded with emotion. There was a moment, a fleeting second, where I thought I saw the boy I had raised, the one who used to come to me for advice, the one who trusted me and confided in me. But it was gone, replaced by something harder, colder. The betrayal in his eyes was unmistakable. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off before he could speak. "No," I said firmly, the word thick with anger and hurt. "You don't get to explain yourself. Not now, not after what you've done." Richard's jaw tightened and his eyes flickered toward the floor, avoiding my gaze. He looked guilty, but not apologetic. It was as if he was already preparing to defend himself, to offer me the excuses I had heard too many times before. He opened his mouth, but I held up my hand, silencing him. "Don't," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've had enough of your excuses, Richard. I've had enough of this. You're not the person I thought you were." His eyes snapped back to mine, and there was a flash of defiance there. "You don't understand, Mom," he said, his voice low but steady. I didn't have a choice. I didn't know how to fix it, how to make things right. Fix it, I repeated incredulously. How do you fix a betrayal like this? You sold me out. You let them take everything from me and you didn't even bat an eye. You signed away my life, my house, my business without even blinking. And you think that just fixes itself. He flinched, but only for a second. The guilt didn't settle on his face the way I had expected. Instead, it hardened as if he had built up a wall around himself to protect his actions. It's not that simple, he said, his voice strained. Veronica's parents, Raymond and Claudia, they've been pushing me for years. I was already in too deep with them. I thought if I just did what they wanted, they'd leave me alone. I thought it would be the only way to protect you, to protect us. I couldn't contain the laugh that bubbled up sharp and bitter. Protect me. By betraying me. By selling out your own mother to a con man and his family. That's how you protect me, Richard. His eyes flickered, and for the briefest moment I saw the faintest trace of regret. I didn't want to hurt you, he muttered as though the words were forced out. But they had leverage on me. They were threatening to ruin everything I worked for, my career, my reputation. If I didn't cooperate, they said I'd lose it all. I thought it would be easier to just go along with it. So you let them steal everything from me to save yourself. I asked, my voice rising with each word. You let them take everything that mattered, everything I built, everything I loved, and you did nothing to stop it. I didn't know how to stop it, he said, his voice cracking. I was trying to protect you, but it just got out of control. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't know they were going to take everything. I shook my head in disbelief. You didn't know, Richard, you're the one who signed those papers. You're the one who handed over the deed to this place, who authorized the transfer of everything we built together. You knew, and you let it happen. His shoulders sagged. For a moment, he looked like the man I had once known, the man I had raised. But it was fleeting, a shadow that disappeared as quickly as it came. He ran a hand through his hair, his face contorted with frustration. I was trying to save us, he repeated, as if the words alone would justify everything. It was the only way to survive. I thought I could make it right later. I didn't know it would come to this. Later, I repeated the word, tasting bitter on my tongue. You kept putting it off. You kept thinking you could fix everything later, but by then you'd already destroyed everything that mattered. I turned away, unable to look at him any longer. The betrayal cut deeper with each passing second. I had tried for so long to believe in him, to believe in the family we had once been, and now standing here it was clear to me that it was all gone. The love I thought we had, the trust I had placed in him, it had all been shattered. There was nothing left to salvage. Mom Richard's voice was soft now, almost pleading. Please, I never wanted this. I didn't know what else to do. The desperation in his voice pierced me, but it didn't soften the blow. You should have done something, I said, turning back to face him. You should have fought for me, for us, for everything we've been through. I didn't know how he whispered, his eyes downcast. I just wanted it to stop. The silence between us was heavy, thick, with the weight of everything unspoken. I stood there staring at him, trying to find some thread of the boy I had raised, the one who used to believe in right and wrong. But all I saw now was a man who had chosen the easy way out, a man who had let greed and fear dictate his actions. I didn't know him anymore. The realization hit me like a cold wave. You're not the person I thought you were, I said, my voice breaking. You're not my son. Not anymore. His face twisted with hurt, and for a moment I saw the guilt in his eyes, the same guilt I had seen when he was younger, the same look he had when he'd done something wrong. But this time there was no apology. There was no remorse that could take back what he had done. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, but it wasn't an acceptance. It was a recognition of something I already knew. The apology wasn't enough. Nothing could fix this. I turned away from him, walking toward the door, the finality of it settling deep within me. As I reached for the handle, I heard his voice softer now, calling out to me. "Mom, please." I stopped my hand on the door, but I didn't turn around. "You've made your choice, Richard, and now so have I." With that, I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, leaving behind the wreckage of what once was. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew it was away from him, away from this place that had become a cage. I had to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my future. But I couldn't do that here. Not anymore. And so I walked out. The days after the confrontation with Richard felt like a disorienting blur, each one heavier than the last. I had hoped that the confrontation, the words exchanged, would give me some sense of closure, some sense that I had taken back my life. But it hadn't. Instead, the ache in my chest deepened, and the weight of what had been lost seemed to press down on me from all sides. I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't just about a house or money. It was about a lifetime of choices, mistakes, and regrets. A lifetime of love, sacrifices, and betrayal. Everything I had worked so hard for, everything I had tried to build, had come crashing down around me in one swift, cold moment. It wasn't just Richard I was angry with. No, the anger was deeper than that. The betrayal didn't just cut me from the outside, it sliced through the very heart of my identity. I had spent so many years building my career, nurturing my relationships with my clients, pushing forward and sacrificing my own personal life in the process. And in the end, it was that very career, the thing I had placed all my faith in, that had been my undoing. I had become so consumed by my own success, so fixated on proving my worth to the world, that I had failed to see the cracks forming in my family, in the people who were supposed to mean the most to me. I had chosen my career over them, and now in the end, it was those very people who had chosen to tear me down. I spent the first few days in a fog, paralyzed by the realization that I had lost everything. My home was gone. My business was hanging by a thread, and the relationships I had worked so hard to maintain, especially with Richard, were in shambles. I didn't know how to move forward. I felt like a shell of the woman I had once been, walking through the motions without any sense of direction. The emotional toll of the betrayal was overwhelming. How could I have missed it all? How could I have been so blind to what was happening right under my nose? I stayed in the penthouse, even though it no longer felt like mine. I could have gone somewhere else, but I couldn't. This had been my home, my sanctuary. It had been the one place where I could escape from the world, the one place that held the echoes of a life I had built. Now it felt like an empty shell. The walls seemed to mock me, reminding me of the life I once had. I could hear the laughter of family and friends in my memories, but it was a hollow, distant sound. The house had become a reflection of my soul, empty, broken, and filled with the ghosts of a life I could no longer recognize. The days blurred into one another, and I spent most of them in a haze of reflection and self-recrimination. I couldn't look at Richard without feeling a deep, painful ache in my chest. Every time I thought about what he had done, what he had allowed to happen, I was overwhelmed with a mixture of sorrow and rage. How had I raised a son who could betray me so coldly? How had I raised a child who could so easily turn his back on everything we had built together? I had loved him. I had supported him. I had poured my heart into him. And yet he had thrown it all away for the sake of his own convenience, his own comfort. But as the days passed, something began to shift inside me. The fog started to lift just slightly. I began to realize that the anger I was feeling, as justified as it was, wasn't going to get me anywhere. If I wanted to move forward, if I wanted to reclaim my life, I couldn't let the anger consume me. I had to focus on what I could control, what was left. And that for the first time in weeks gave me a small glimmer of hope. I called Lena. I needed her more than ever. The legal battle was far from over, but I knew I couldn't fight it alone. I couldn't navigate this tangled mess on my own. The evidence we had gathered, the forged signatures, the fraudulent transfers, it was all there. But the legal process was slow, methodical, and full of obstacles. I had to be patient, and I had to be strong. I couldn't let the Sterlings or Richard think for a second that they had broken me. Not now, not after everything I had been through. Lena was a rock throughout this entire process. She helped me gather the pieces of my broken life and start putting them back together. But it wasn't just about the legalities anymore. It wasn't just about getting the house back or recovering the money they had taken. It was about rebuilding my life from the ground up, about rediscovering who I was, what I truly wanted, and what I was capable of. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There were still court dates to attend, still battles to fight, but I had to take it one step at a time. I had to rebuild my trust in myself before I could even begin to think about rebuilding my relationships with others. Lena and I met with the FBI going over the evidence we had gathered. The investigation was progressing, and I could see the glimmer of a resolution on the horizon. But as the days passed, the legal drama began to feel secondary. I couldn't stop thinking about Richard. I couldn't stop wondering if there was any hope for him for us. Could we ever heal from this? Could I ever forgive him? Could I ever trust him again? And then came the day when Richard reached out. It was a simple message, just a few words, but it was enough to send my heart into a tailspin. He wanted to meet. He wanted to talk. I didn't know if I was ready for it. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. But there was something else, too. A part of me, the part of me that was still his mother, wanted to hear him out, wanted to understand why he had done this, wanted to hear him say, truly say, that he was sorry. Could I even allow myself to hope for that? I met him in a small, quiet cafe. It was a place we used to visit together when he was a teenager. I had always liked it because it was simple, unpretentious, and comfortable. The soft hum of conversation around us felt strangely comforting, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. But as Richard walked in, his face haggard, his posture slumped, I realized just how much he had changed. He didn't look like the confident young man I had known. He looked broken, lost, just like I felt. He sat down across from me, his eyes immediately dropping to the table. I didn't speak at first. I just watched him trying to see beyond the guilt, beyond the excuses, to the man he had become, the man I had hoped he would be. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low and filled with shame. "I've messed everything up, Mom. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I can." My heart clenched at the sound of his voice, the brokenness in it. This wasn't the son I had known, but it was still him. And despite everything, part of me still wanted to believe that the son I had raised was still inside him. "You've made a lot of mistakes, Richard," I said quietly. My voice steady despite the pain that threatened to rise up. "And I don't know if I can forgive you for what you've done. Not yet. But I need you to understand something. This isn't just about what you did. It's about what you've become. And that's what hurts the most. You let them destroy everything we had. You let them take everything from us." He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I never meant to hurt you," he whispered. "But I've made so many bad choices. I don't know how to fix them. I don't know if I even can." I looked at him, my heart torn between the anger I still felt and the love I had for him. "I don't know if you can either," I said softly. "But if you want to rebuild, if you want any chance at fixing this, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to stop hiding behind excuses and start facing the truth, not just about what you did, but about who you are now." The silence between us was heavy, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like the weight of betrayal. It felt like the possibility of healing. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. Richard's journey was only just beginning. So was mine. We both had a long road ahead of us, but I was ready to take the first step. For myself, for him, and for the future we could rebuild piece by piece. It's strange how things come full circle. I never thought I'd find myself sitting in the quiet solitude of this apartment, the walls still bare and empty, just like the shell of a life I once knew. And yet, in that emptiness, I began to find something I hadn't expected: a sense of peace. A peace that felt like it had taken a lifetime to build, but it was there, slowly growing as the days passed. The penthouse was gone. My business, which had once felt like an unshakable fortress, had been reduced to rubble. And my relationship with Richard, that too, had been shattered, leaving only fragments of what we once shared. But somewhere along the way, in the darkest hours of my despair, I realized that what I had lost, everything that was taken from me, didn't define who I was. It was late one evening, a few weeks after Richard's visit, that I decided to take a walk. The city felt different now, more alive somehow. The skyline still towered above me, an unyielding force in the night. But instead of feeling small beneath it, I felt connected. For the first time in months, I could breathe. Maybe it was the air in the city, or maybe it was something else, something inside me that had started to shift. I had spent so many years building a life based on external success, trying to prove to the world and to myself that I was worthy of love and admiration. I poured every ounce of energy into my career, my clients, my business, believing that if I could just do enough work enough, I would fill the void that I had been trying to ignore. But the truth was, I had been running away from the things that really mattered, the people who really mattered. And in the end, it wasn't my career that I needed. It wasn't the penthouse or the business empire I had built. It was the connection I had with the people I loved, the trust I had with my family, and the ability to be vulnerable to admit that I needed help. It was the very thing I had been afraid of all along. The truth that I couldn't do it alone. The night air was crisp, and I walked for hours, letting my thoughts clear. As I wandered through the familiar streets of the city, I felt a strange sense of gratitude creeping in. Gratitude for the lessons I had learned, even though they had come through the hardest of trials. I was grateful for the opportunity to start over, to rebuild from the ashes of what I had lost. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I would face it head-on, with or without my old life. The next few weeks were filled with legal battles, meetings with Lena, and a process that seemed endless. But with each passing day, the weight of betrayal that had once suffocated me began to lift. The evidence we had gathered, fraudulent signatures, illegal transfers, and all the lies I had been fed, was enough to bring down the Sterlings. With the help of the FBI, they were arrested, their operation unraveled piece by piece. It wasn't just about the money or the house anymore. It was about justice. It was about showing them and myself that I wouldn't let them get away with it. Not this time. Still, the legal proceedings weren't the most important thing for me anymore. What mattered was the rebuilding process, the slow, painstaking work of putting the pieces of my life back together. But I wasn't doing it alone anymore. I had Lena, my closest friend, and the steady support of those who truly cared about me. Most of all, I had myself stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. Months passed, and I found myself slowly reclaiming the things I had once held dear, but in a different way. I moved into a small apartment. Nothing fancy, nothing extravagant, but it was mine. It was a fresh start, a place where I could breathe freely and reflect without the constant weight of the past hanging over me. I began to rebuild my business this time with a new focus, not just on success, but on balance. I started taking on smaller projects, working with clients who valued my vision and integrity. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about rediscovering my passion, my purpose. And then there was Richard. The road to reconciliation with him had been slow, painful, and filled with moments of doubt. For so long, I had wanted him to see the error of his ways, to understand the gravity of his betrayal, and to apologize in a way that would heal the deep wound he had caused. But the truth was, there was no magic moment, no perfect words that would fix it all. There was only time, patience, and a willingness to start over. Richard and I began speaking more regularly, though our relationship was still fragile. I could see the weight of guilt in his eyes when he talked to me. The boy I had raised was still there somewhere beneath the layers of shame and regret, and I had to acknowledge that just like me, he had been caught in a web of lies and manipulation. The Sterlings had used him. They had preyed on his weaknesses, on his fear of losing everything. But that didn't excuse his actions. I wasn't ready to forgive him, not yet. I wasn't sure I ever would be. But I could see that he was trying, and that was enough for now. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to force things. We would move forward on our own terms, slowly but surely. And then there was the foundation. I had thought about it for months, but it wasn't until everything had settled down that I finally made the decision to take the next step. I had always wanted to leave behind something more meaningful than just a business. The Anthony Miller Medical Research Foundation was my late husband's legacy, and it had always been about helping those in need. But I wanted to expand it to do more to protect the vulnerable, especially the elderly from scams like the one I had fallen victim to. I reached out to some of my closest contacts in the legal and financial sectors, and with their help, I began the process of adding a new division to the Foundation Elder Protection Services. It was a natural extension of everything I had been through. I couldn't change the past, but I could use my experiences to help others avoid the same fate. I wanted to educate people, raise awareness, and offer legal support to those who were being exploited. It was a cause that was deeply personal to me now. The first fundraiser was small, intimate, but it was a success. The support I received from the community people who had watched me rebuild and recover was overwhelming. It wasn't about the money. It was about making a difference, about ensuring that no one else would have to go through what I had. It was my way of reclaiming my life, of turning the betrayal into something meaningful. As the months passed, the wounds of the past slowly began to heal, though they would never fully disappear. There were moments when I would wake up in the middle of the night, my mind racing with memories of what had happened. But they didn't control me anymore. They didn't define me. I had learned that I could live without them, that I could move forward even in the face of everything I had lost. I had come to realize that the key to rebuilding wasn't about erasing the past. It was about finding meaning in it. It was about understanding that the scars, though painful, were a part of who I was now. And in a way, they had made me stronger. They had taught me the value of resilience, of finding strength in vulnerability, and of never giving up no matter how hard life gets. By the time the year came to a close, I had found a new sense of peace. My business was thriving again, my foundation was making an impact, and I had rebuilt the relationships that mattered most, especially with Richard, even if they were still fragile. The journey wasn't over. It never would be. But I had found my footing. And for the first time in a long time, I was no longer defined by what I had lost, but by what I had gained. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was also full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace them. As I stood at the window of my new apartment looking out at the city, I couldn't help but smile. The road had been long and difficult, but it had led me here. And here I was, whole again. I've spent the past year reflecting on everything that's happened, and while the journey has been long and filled with obstacles, I've come to realize something crucial. Healing doesn't happen in a straight line. Sometimes you're going to feel lost, confused, and overwhelmed by betrayal and loss. But every step forward counts, no matter how small it may seem. The path to reclaiming your life, your trust, and your peace of mind is messy, but it's worth it. If you're in the middle of your own struggles, remember that you are not defined by the pain you've endured. Instead, you are defined by your strength to keep going, by your ability to rise from the ashes and build something new. For those who may be feeling stuck or discouraged, take it one day at a time. Don't rush the process. Find your support system, lean into the people who care about you, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. Whether it's professional support friends or even the community around you, you don't have to do this alone. And if you've learned anything from the challenges you've faced, let it fuel your purpose moving forward. Transform your pain into power. I'd love to hear your thoughts. How have you navigated your own battles, and what steps have helped you move forward? Please share your stories in the comments or reach out. You're not alone. Thank you for following along with me on this journey. Each of us has our own path, but together we can create a community of strength, resilience, and healing. Keep going and trust that your best days are ahead.